What's good, everybody, and welcome back to yet another car review here on the driveway, where this week our friends at Acura decided to give us a taste of their largest offering of precision crafted performance. However, the key word in this case is performance, because behind me is the 2020 MDX A-Spec.
Girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I like the girls with their nails done. Girls with their
All right, boys and girls, it is time to get this party rolling. And step number one, as always, is, you guessed it, it is time to fire this baby into life, which we can actually do today through the factory remote start system. Now, just a quick side note, not all 2020 MDXs will include remote start as standard. You have to start with the MDX technology package and then work your way up in order to get remote start included in the standard features list. Now, because the A-Spec trim sits above the tech package and also includes it in the standard features list, we do get the remote start included on our test car. So to activate it, you just lock it, hold the button down for a couple seconds, and now, whether you have the remote start or not, all MDXs for 2020 do include Acura's advanced keyless access system. Now, the first thing you'll get is an absolutely gorgeous key fob here. I love it, especially with what looks like a piece of glass on the back with the Acura logo embedded underneath. But on the front, you have the usual array of buttons, again, plus or minus the button for the remote start. You have lock, unlock. Most cars will come with a power tailgate. You have the panic function, as well as the releasable key blade that comes out of the bottom of the key fob here. Now, in the case of my test car, we actually have touchpads and buttons for unlocking and locking on all four of the door handles. We also have the lock and unlock activated power folding exterior mirrors, but with the key fob on you to unlock the vehicle, all you do is just grab the handle. And as you can see, when you do, your mirrors will automatically extend outwards. And then to lock the vehicle, just push the button on any one of the door handles. Now, as you would imagine, like pretty much any other vehicle with keyless access, starting this MDX is an absolute snap. Again, just have the key fob anywhere on the vehicle or on your person. In this case, put your foot on the brake pedal and then hit this red aluminum engine start button up here on the dashboard, and now, when you look at the outside of this 4th generation MDX, you really start to understand how Acura has come up with the idea of precision crafted performance, offering a design that's not only elegant, but also very sporty and slightly aggressive at the same time. And you start here just at the front. The first thing definitely worth noting are the LED automatic jewel eye headlights. These are factory on pretty much every MDX out there, and they are comprised of 5 lenses per light. Your 3 outer ones here are your main beam, with your high beam being comprised of the 2 inner ones. These lenses also turn into your automatic LED daytime running lights, but they dim down a little bit, giving the front of this car a completely different lighting signature than pretty much any other car on the road. You also have the LED turn signals here, which turn into daytime running lights on their own, which actually look really, really cool here with the yellow angles on the outside. But if you follow that down, you'll then find the LED fog lights down here at the bottom, and a sort of subtle lower end. I've actually looked at this car's sibling, the RDX A-Spec, And the front end of that was a little bit more aggressive compared to this, but you still do have the gloss black lower trim here, signature to the A-Spec package. And of course, making a whole lot of noise behind it is the signature diamond pentagon grille here in the middle. Of course, the Acura badge itself, very large in size, but also completely shrouded in, because behind all of this, you have things such as the active park assist here with sensors behind the front and rear bumpers. You also have collision mitigated braking, forward collision warning, advanced adaptive cruise control. Now, because the A-Spec trim is not just strictly about performance, but nor is it strictly about luxury either, Acura wanted to make sure that when it comes to certain elements of this vehicle, that you have the perfect combination of both. And the case in point are these, the 20-inch dark gray finished aluminum alloy wheels, and they really do set this car off very, very nicely. And even when you have a similar color for your paint, like this modern steel metallic here on my test car, they really do have that beautiful element of luxury design, but also of that sort of sporty nature with the dark gray paint. Now, even though the MDX definitely has the presence of a high-end crossover by anyone's imagination, as you look down the side here, a lot of the features seem rather rudimentary, especially even in non-luxury brands these days are starting to add features like some of the ones you'll see here. You do have a couple of unique things like the A-Spec badges here on the side. You also have one down there on the rear trunk as well, again letting you know that you are driving one of the higher performing versions of Acura's vehicles. But as you come down the side, again, you have the power folding exterior mirrors with a nice body color accent with the gloss black going on here as well. Again, that's all a part of the A-Spec trim with the LED turn signal going up through the middle. These mirrors are also equipped with blind spot indication as well as rear cross traffic monitoring, but the icon is not where you would expect. If you look at the mirror itself, there really is nothing there, and that's because the icons are actually located inside of this little piece here, actually on the interior. So not only does that make it a little bit more easier to see overall, but especially if you're driving at night, it's a lot easier to see compared to ones that are way out here on the mirrors, and much easier to see out of your peripherals as well. And finally, if you come up towards the top, where most might expect there to be a panoramic sunroof, Acura has instead decided to go for a standard size, which actually is not too bad, considering that most vehicles with panoramic sunroof actually lose a little bit of structural rigidity. And considering the size of the MDX, it's a good thing that Acura went with a standard size instead of a panoramic. Now, although the MDX has been refreshed quite a number of times throughout its 5-year span for this 4th generation, the rear end of the car still seems to maintain its design from its very beginning. Now, that's not to say it's bad. I actually really do like the way it looks back here, especially with these full LED taillights and things like these smoked badges for things like the Super Handling all-wheel drive and the MDX badge, just to name a couple. A couple of other noteworthy things as you get down here, for starters, you have the exposed parking sensors for the front and rear park assist that I mentioned earlier, and also, as you can tell, you have these large exhaust tips. Now, a couple of things up here on the trunk. Again, you do also have the A-Spec badge, a nice little strip of chrome running across the middle, which I actually like, as well as the government mandated backup camera here just above the license plate. And of course, to finish it all off, you do have a standard power tailgate to go along with it. Now, as you would expect from such a large crossover with space for at least 7 people, you do of course get one other thing, which is a lot of space for cargo. Now, in typical fashion, behind the third row of seats, you don't exactly get a whole lot of space, although I will say it does look a little bit larger compared to some of the other 3-row crossovers that I've tested so far. Now, behind the third row of seats here, you're looking at just under 16 cubic feet of space. It's about 15.5 to 15.8, depending on who you talk to. But then if you fold down this third row of seats, that extends to 43 cubic feet of space. And if you fold down all of them, that includes the second row up there in the middle, you will get almost 91 cubic feet of space. Now, if you put the numbers on paper, that means that the MDX has more rear cargo space with all the seats down than a new Hyundai Palisade. Now, while the A-Spec trim has its own unique defining characteristics on the exterior, once you open the door, however, you are greeted by the A-Spec's true sporty nature, and it all starts with these, the red and black leather and perforated Alcantara upholstered seats. Now, these seats are incredibly comfortable, and combined with this car's softer independent suspension, I have had no problems staying in these seats for extended amounts of time. Not to mention the fact I am a sucker for red interiors, and combined with this beautiful black Alcantara and the red stitching, it just is a beautiful place to spend your time. Now, the seats themselves are actually very nicely contoured. I'm especially fond of the slightly less intrusive bolstering, but still thick enough here for my midsection, as well as the lumbar support, which sits in a perfect position for someone with a mild back pain problem. But also, they are heated and cooled for both the front occupants, and they are multi-way power adjustable for both sides. And I believe both sides also get the lumbar support as well. The driver's seat, as you can expect, does have a two-person memory, as noted by the buttons up here on the door. And then finally down here, you have all of the typical controls, including the button to manually fold the mirrors in as well, along with the rest of the mirror controls, your locks, window locks, and all 4 automatic windows. Now, once you're actually inside the MDX's cabin, the first thing that jumps out at me is that while most high-end crossovers and SUVs in this category can be a little bit button heavy and certain things may seem a little bit complicated, Acura actually went for a little bit more of a clean look. I mean, sure, you have buttons all over your steering wheel in typical fashion and a slightly confusing, or maybe not so slightly confusing, dual screen infotainment system, but we'll get to that here in just a bit. But other than that, very minimalistic in terms of the buttons, and even the buttons for the gear selector. Again, everything very clearly labeled and just very easy to use, with a few minor exceptions, and we'll talk about that here as we go along. The first thing of note is directly in front of you, which is the A-Spec specific thicker rimmed and partially perforated leather trimmed steering wheel. Now, this steering wheel is not heated, so that's an option that might be something that most people would want, but they do have these thick bolsters up here at the top. Again, the partial perforations here on the side. You have the bright silver paddle shifters here on the back that activate the Sport Shift manual mode through the 9-speed automatic transmission. And then, of course, you have all the different functions you could possibly want. Over here on the left, the majority of these are for your hands-free radio and Bluetooth controls with voice recognition. Over here, you have the majority of the controls, not only for the small little LCD display up there at the top of the gauge cluster, but you also have things for the active radar cruise control, as well as the distance sensors for the cruise control and for the lane keep assist as well. Not to mention a small little A-Spec badge inside of this filled in split spoke here at the bottom of the wheel itself. The wheel itself is tilting and telescoping, so you have a little nodule here on the left. That is for the power tilting and telescoping function. And finally, coming over here all the way to the left, you have a few separate little buttons, one to turn off the active park assist, one to turn on or off the lane departure warning. You also have your traction control, as well as the forward collision warning, along with an electronic parking brake with auto brake hold. Now, if there's one area that I've had any complaints with at all during my entire week that I've spent with the MDX, it would be with this, the split screen infotainment system with factory navigation. Now, the navigation system is not a standard feature on all MDXs. You have to get an MDX with the tech package in order to get the nav system at all. Now, although it looks confusing, the only gripe I've had is that the system has sometimes failed to even turn on at all while I've been driving. I actually had a 20-minute drive I spent with this thing at one point, and neither of these screens turned on. So on my way back, I actually had to pull over and start it again just to get the screens to illuminate. So that was a little bit of a hindrance for me. But if you're worried about which function does which, or which screen does which rather, it can be very easy to sum up. The lower one here is primarily for climate zones and also for audio controls, versus up here with things such as navigation and all of the other controls that you'll find in this little control station down here. Very easy to use, and again, most of these controls, if not all of them, will show up here on the top screen. So you have navigation, which we're in now, phone connectivity along with smartphone integration. This system does include Android Auto and Apple CarPlay connectivity, so if you're worried about that, you'll have to dig through some of the infotainment systems in here in order to get to that, but it does have compatibility for both. And you also have generic vehicle info as well as infotainment settings. You also have the day and night mode, and then of course the giant button that tells you to go back from whatever you were doing, not to mention the little click wheel in here that can be used choose to do things such as zoom in and out on the map or go through various settings within one of the other tabs. Down here in the lower one, however, again, this is primarily for audio. So while we have the climate zones and things for the heated and cooled seats, you can also go to the audio system itself. Now, talking about music, this thing has a serious sound system in it. It is an ELS surround sound system that is included with the tech package as a standard feature on the A-Spec here. And let me just tell you, one push of this button and it sounds like you're in a concert hall. Now, while I did say that this center screen here in the middle contains your climate control settings, there are also a couple of other buttons for that same feature down here in the bottom. So up here on the screen, you have things such as your fan speed. It's all touch responsive, so you can do things like air conditioning recycling. You can turn on the rear half of the air conditioning system. You have your different temperature controls on either side, as well as the touchscreen function for your heated and cooled seats. Now, the touch responsiveness of this screen is actually really nice, and it's actually one of the nicer ones I've tested in a lot of other high-end crossovers, so I've actually was pleased to see that. But if you don't want to be bothered with the touchscreen, you can do simple functions such as your front and rear defrost, your automatic setting. You can turn the AC on or off, and also you have your dual temperature control triggers on either side of those functions as well. So if you move just a little bit lower than that, you do actually have a sizable little tray down here, at least a little indentation. You can set your phone in there. If you open this up, you have one 12-volt 120-watt power outlet, as well as a nice little storage area as well. It's wide enough for maybe an older iPhone or something like that, but nothing like today's larger smartphones. As you come back from that, as you can see, I've got a little bit of a demonstration set up here. You've got two decently sized cup holders. The front one seems to be a little bit smaller than the back one here, so it can hold at least one 16.9 fluid ounce bottle. I also have a bigger 32 ounce bottle of Powerade sitting right here, and that actually seems to fit in the rear one a lot easier than it does in the front. So if you have a bigger drink, I would suggest putting it in the rear one here. Now, to the left of that, we have the push button control station for the 9-speed electronic control transmission. But it has all your typical functions. You have a button for park. You can pull this little trigger here for reverse, so when you do, you hear the little chime go off. You do also have the rear view camera, as I've said before. You can actually change the view on this through the little button here in the control station below the screens. It does also include trajectory as well, so that's a nice CD to have. You have neutral, and then you also have drive, but with drive you can actually push this again and it will put it in sport mode, as recognized by the little S up here on the center part of your display. Now, below that, we actually have the rather small button, but it is actually ribbed, so you can tell what it is. This is for Acura's Integrated Dynamics System, or IDS. So you have 3 different modes. You have comfort, normal, and sport, and of course each one adjusts the dynamics of the car accordingly. Comfort makes the drive a little bit more relaxed, makes it a little bit easier to live with. Normal is basically a balance between the two, versus sport, where the steering firms up. The Super Handling all-wheel drive is kind of tensed up a little bit, so the steering is much more responsive. Same with the throttle response and the gear shift response as well. It's very nice and quick, and when you really let that V6 engine up front start to sing, it really does become a lot more of an engaging drive. As you come back from that, you actually have a nice little sliding tray here, which has oodles of space in it, and you can actually slide this center console forward and back if you so desire as well. You have 1 auxiliary port, 2 USB ports in here, as well as another USB port that is a 2.5 amp phone charger. So really, you just have charging stations everywhere. So if you don't want to use the one up here in this little tray, you've got 3 USBs and an aux port down in the bottom. And as I said, you actually have quite a lot of space in there, so that is definitely something worth noting. The center console, first off, it's leather wrapped with the red stitching to kind of match the rest of the interior. You have a nice little storage spot up here in the top. I kind of was actually expecting maybe a wireless charging station to be right here. That would probably be the most appropriate place to put it. But then again, you can also lift up this station right here, and that reveals the rest of this entire lower storage area. So really, even though this little area slides, you can actually open up this whole area from either this little area or using the center console lid. And last but not least, of course, we have to talk about the sunroof in this car, because as you can see, it is the standard size sunroof like you would see on a lot of other vehicles equipped with such a feature. The sunroof itself, it has the simple little shade, no mechanical deal whatsoever, and the trigger for which is the one over here on the left. Now, even though I'm not usually used to being a backseat passenger in most of my press cars these days, I gotta say, it is not a bad place to be back here in the back of this MDX. First off, I'm 6'1", so I am a little bit on the taller side, and I do have a couple of things worth mentioning. First off, if you have a taller driver like me, this is where I have the seat set to my memory setting, and you can see that my knees are a little bit close to the driver's back, and even though the back of these seats are lined in leather, so you do have at least a comfortable spot to rest your knees, and they are curved, I would say that if you are a taller person, you better hope that you have a little bit of a shorter driver. Otherwise, you're not going to have the greatest leg room available. But other than that, I've got actually a raised headliner back here, so I do have a lot more room, at least for my head. And if you're worried about charging your phone or perhaps getting some proper ventilation back here, you needn't worry about that, because if you look down here at the base of the back of the center console here, we have the rear climate controls as well, so temperature zones, on, off, automatic, climate zones, as well as the fan speed, all located back here with its own little individual display. And if you're also worried about having to charge your phone, being a backseat passenger, you also have two 2.5 amp USB charging ports also located at the base of the back of the center console. Now, also one other unique thing about this vehicle is the location of the triggers to fold down the seats, and we actually have to get out of this vehicle to show you what I'm talking about. So if you look at the seats themselves right here, you do have a manual latch that you can use to raise or lower the seat. But if you're worried about having to get access to the rear seats, there actually are two buttons. There's one up here on the shoulder area of the seats, and there's also one down here. So if you push this button, you'll see that the seat automatically folds down, it slides forward, and allows you access into the third row. Now, coming from somebody who has spent a lot of time in the third row of any large size vehicle, I can tell you that it is not always the most comfortable place to be. I mean, if this was something like a Tahoe or a Suburban, you more than likely would have a pretty comfortable ride. But in the MDX, it's a different story. If you look at my knees, you can see they are planted in the back of the seat. So if you're going to be putting anyone in this third row of seats, generally it's going to be kids only. Also, another kind of interesting thing that you'll note is while the front two rows of seats have the red leather and Alcantara trim, the third row passengers just have to make do with some good old-fashioned black leather, although the company has put some nice red stitching here just for that little extra sporty touch. Alrighty guys, so we are on the road in the MDX A-Spec. Now, being that this is the more performance-oriented model of the MDX family, I figured it's only fair that we start with a few numbers. Now, in the MDX, it comes with a 3.5-liter VTec-equipped and variable cylinder management equipped V6, which once gas is applied makes 290 horsepower and 267 pound-feet of torque. Like I was mentioning earlier, it puts the power to the ground through a 9-speed automatic transmission, and for the A-Spec, Acura's Super Handling all-wheel drive. Now, unfortunately, being with all-wheel drive and with a bigger motor, gas is not going to be in your favor. So far over this week, we've only averaged about 17 miles to the gallon in primarily city driving conditions, although we have done some highway driving with this thing as well. Now, the EPA rates it at 19 in the city and 25 on the highway, so it is a little bit woeful if you're thinking about buying a crossover of this size and expecting to get better gas mileage. Now, the variable cylinder management does help in that. Again, it will drop 2 of the cylinders to run this car on 4 cylinders, again, to allow you to get, I guess, a little bit better gas mileage. But if you really think about it, there aren't too many V6 3-row crossovers still left on the market. I mean, you have larger ones like the new Ford Expedition, and you also have slightly smaller ones like the new Explorer, and you also have the Kia Telluride and Hyundai Palisade twins, just to name a few. what exactly is good about this MDX is the comfort and ride quality. I was actually expecting this car to be a little bit more on the harsh side, being that this is the A-Spec model and you would expect a little bit more of a sportier, more tuned up feeling. But in this, it's actually quite comfortable. Now, I will admit the road noise is not the quietest I've ever heard in any of these cars, although the engine itself will purr along at 1200 RPMs in 9th gear all day long. However, if you want to wake this car up just a little bit and you want to kind of experience that more sporty nature, all you have to do is reach down here, put it in its sportiest setting through the integrated dynamic system, put it in manual mode, drop it down to first, and I actually gotta say, for a V6, it sounds pretty good. You know, when everything goes turbocharged and 4-cylinder and hybrid these days, I actually am gonna miss that sound, because the engine just has this real deep, rich growl that goes all the way up to its red line at nearly 7,000 RPMs. And even if you don't want to use its most hardcore setting, if you leave it in comfort or normal mode and just put it in drive, it drives just like any other comfortable 3-row crossover you could imagine. Now, in terms of comfort level, this was actually something that I was quite surprised about. Unfortunately, at 30 years old right now, I do actually have a sciatic nerve in my lower back, so that's been kind of a selling point for me when it comes to vehicles that I test. And with this car, the lumbar support is right in the middle of my back. It's exactly where I want it to be. And also the seats, while sporty in nature, especially with the red and black color combination, they actually are a little bit more on the comfortable side than I was imagining. However, if you leave the lumbar in a more lower setting, kind of where it's retracted all the way back, you're going to feel a little bit more of a firm nature in the seating position. So at the end of it all, the MDX really boils down to this. Are you willing to sacrifice over $56,000 for this car here, when comparatively speaking, you could get a 3-row crossover that has just as much equipment, but for about 10 grand less? Well, it really depends on your point of view. Do you want to go with a premium brand, or do you want to go with something a little bit more on the luxury side of things, like what Acura is aiming for? Now, being an enthusiast, I really do like a nice performance-oriented vehicle, and the MDX A-Spec has lived up to my enthusiast dreams over and over again. However, if I had a family, I don't know that I would buy one of these. I probably would settle for something a little bit softer, but something that still has just as much grunt from the engine. Again, probably something like a Palisade or Telluride, because it's kind of right in the middle, and especially considering that those cost about 10 grand less than this, that definitely is a breaker when it comes to the 3-row crossover family. Well, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this review and drive of the 2020 Acura MDX A-Spec, and if you've liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up, and also be sure to click that subscribe button down below for many more videos like this and more to come in the future. But at the end of it all, a huge thanks goes out to the folks at Acura for providing this wonderful MDX to drive for an entire week. But in the end, guys, I hope you enjoyed the review, and I will see y'all next time. Take care, everyone, and stay safe.